Good evening and welcome to the Nobody Asked Me Guy. Listen, guys, we're very happy that you're here. We're very pleased that you're here. We have an exciting program today. We have with us Lieutenant Colonel Billy Graham, former pilot for the United States Army. He flew over Viet Nam, massive experience that he's going to be sharing with you. Individuals that he's met, most of us are familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen and the movie Red Tails and all those kinds of things. And Brother Graham has been very fortunate to have rubbed shoulders with some of these gentlemen and even received awards. And he's going to talk to us about all of those things. So sit back, relax, and get in on this piece of history. And I like to make very clear to everyone that, as we all know, it's all American history. However, since February has been deemed Black history, we will be correct and say we're here during our Black History segment. But you guys know we do this every day. Now, Brother Graham hails from. He's a native of Arcadia, Louisiana. Yeah, he's a Louisiana, a Southerner. You know, we like the heat, guys. But right now we don't have a lot of heat. He resides in Ruston, Louisiana. As a matter of fact, home of my alma mater, Louisiana Tech, and where we were national champs way back, probably before some of you were born. But I know we have a lot of sports. We have a lot of sports enthusiasts out there, so you might want to know that. He's an undergrad. He did his undergrad work at Southern University of Baton Rouge, where he received the Bachelor's of Science in Mathematics. You know, I can hardly add, Brother Graham. I can hardly add, and you have a degree, so I'm going to have to call you for some pointers. He did advanced studies at the following institutions at Prairie View A&M University in Prairie View, Texas, where he got his MA degree in counseling. The Command and General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, I'm sorry, where he received a master's degree, certificate in theology, Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia. His professional training and experience consists of the following. He's a commissioned officer of the United States Army. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, as we've mentioned already. He's a military pilot for 24 years, guys. That's a long time, 24 years, to be flying anybody's, guys. He's a commercial pilot license, has commercial pilot's license from the Federal Aviation Administration. He's an instructor in military science at Bishop College in Dallas, Texas, a mathematics instructor at Grambling State Tigers, Grambling State University, and is a retired teacher for Lincoln Parish School Systems in Ruston, Louisiana. Now, Brother Graham has served 2 combat tours in Vietnam, 2 in Europe, and lived 17 years across the waters. And I'm going to share more, but as we know, we always salute our veterans. We know that they put themselves in harm's way, and there's a lot of talk back and forth about civil wars, etc. However, until we have been in someone else's shoes, I don't dare say anything about any war because I wasn't in a war. But we just want to again thank Brother Graham for his services and all things that he's done for our country. Now, the number of honors and awards received during his military experience are many, such as the Bronze Star with the 1 oak leaf cluster, the Air Medal with the 22 OLC. As we get into this, Brother Graham, you'll have to explain this to us because I'm not that privy with all of this, but I thank you for sharing. He's an Army Commendation Medal. Brother, I think we have Mrs. Steele. Hold on one second. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, Mr. Steele. You are live on the Nobody Asked Me Guy show, and I was just telling I'm just getting into reading all the accolades with Brother Graham. He's here, he's excited and fired up, and I was telling him that you and Mr. Steele are very vigilant, and when you give your word, you know, we could just if you tell us it's Easter in the middle of those Detroit storms, I know I can start painting my eggs. So
Detroit storms.
Yes, ma'am. So we knew that at some point you would be here. So thanks for joining us, and I'm going to continue to share some of our things on Brother Graham. That I'm going to shut up and allow him. But since I have stopped, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that missed our show with Mrs. Elaine Easton Steele, Mrs. Elaine Easton Steele is the co-founder of the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development. And Mrs. Steele is still with us. And so she got to sit at the feet of Rosa Parks, and she was her right-hand person. She was there with Mrs. Parks personally, where most of us only get to read about Mrs. Parks. I was watching her movie last night, as a matter of fact, Mrs. Steele was right there alongside of her. And we also have with us Mrs. Anita Peak, and they are sisters. Mrs. Anita Peak is the executive director of the Rosa and Raymond's Park Institute as well. And guys, their dad was a Tuskegee airman.
Wow.
And so we all have something in common here. And as we alluded to when they were on several weeks ago, there have been some glitches as far as cameras, and we all know how technology works. So you won't get to see those beautiful faces, but you will hear those lovely voices. So we want to welcome Mrs. Anita Peak and Mrs. Elaine Eason Steele. And welcome on board, ladies. Now we want to finish.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. And I'll finish with a little bit of sharing our accolades for Brother Lieutenant Colonel Graham, and then we'll get on with the show. Now, he's a member of the Ludley McCall Williams American Legion Post number 53 in Grambling, Louisiana, and a life member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, which are reflective of his contributions to mankind. I, too, am a proud member of the Kappa Alpha Psi. Yes, that is the case. He was a devoted Christian and a member of St. Duty CME Church in Arcadia, Louisiana, where he serves as lay leader, trustee, church treasurer, Sunday school teacher, and former president of the student board. He is the lay leader emeritus for the Monroe District, just a real Renaissance man. He is married to Sandra Rushing Graham. He has 2 daughters, Angela and Alicia, 3 grandchildren, Alexis Nicole Gauss, Gase or Gauss, I think it's Gauss, Alina Cecilia Killen. I'm sorry, I read this already, and now I'm stumbling over these names. And Brother Graham, feel free to correct me. And Robert Graham Killen, and 1 great-grandchild, Aubrey Wallace. So guys, listen, sit back, relax, and get ready to enjoy these great guests that we have. We have Lieutenant Colonel Billy Graham here with us, who you will be hearing from throughout this broadcast. And the sisters, they don't know this, but I call them the sisters double. So we have the sisters double with us. We have Mrs. Elaine Eason Steele and Mrs. Anita Peak. So without further ado, Brother Graham, good evening and welcome to the Nobody Asked Me Guy show.
Good evening and welcome. And it's an honor to be here with all of you. And as you introduce those lovely ladies, I'm just amazed and honored to be able to stand on the shoulders of the Tuskegee Airmen, because they played such an important role in my life as flying aircraft.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
Now, Lieutenant Colonel, will you walk us through your academic interests as a child? And as you had those academic interests, did they include becoming a military pilot?
Okay. Back in Arcadia, which is a small town, during the summer, I had an uncle who gave me a pair of binoculars. And during the summer, when those big cumulus clouds would form, I would take those binoculars and look up at the sky and wonder what it would feel like to touch one of those clouds. In fact, I had a dream of touching a cloud to be a pilot. And, you know, when you have a dream, and I tell young folks, anytime you have a dream more than once, it's God trying to tell you to go for it. If you dream of being a doctor, lawyer, teacher, clergy, whatever, if you keep having that same dream over and over and over, God's trying to tell you to go for it. And you realize your dream. You got to claim that dream with a passion. And that's what happened to me as a young child. I wanted to fly. And as I would tell people about that dream, sometimes people would say, well, you're dreaming too big, or you need to think about doing something else other than flying. Because, you know, back in Arcadia, we didn't have opportunities. I attended a segregated high school. And once graduating, I went on to Southern University and got into the ROTC. But back in high school, my best subject was mathematics. So when I went to Southern, that's what I majored in, mathematics. And, that's God placed, people in your path to make your dreams come true. And I never shall forget that was a math instructor who it's so easy to learn from him, but that was God placing him in my path toward this dream of flying. So once I graduated and was commissioned at Southern as a second lieutenant, I went to my basic course in Virginia, and I met another officer, first lieutenant, who had already gotten his private pilot's license. Well, my parents were not able enough to, to pay for me to become a private pilot, but I had a dream of flying. This individual was going to take his flight test, and he and I arrived at the same time. So he stated, well, you're not doing anything. Come on, I'm going to take my flight test. You come on and ride with me. And I did. And when I took that flight test, which I felt like, well, I'd gotten a second-class education, coming from a segregated school and so forth. But I realized when I took that test that it was easy. And he scored 110, and I believe I scored 105. So I said, wow, that rush came to the fact that, hey, you can do this. God has provided you to do this with your instructors, and even this meeting up with this young man, the lieutenant who had already gotten his private pilot's license. But that rush kept coming in. And I thought about the Tuskegee Airmen because, many times when you have what they considered an experiment, many times, we would always place the best people in those situations. When they integrated the schools when I was young, after I had graduated from high school, they always took the best student to place in those schools. So like the airmen, those guys were engineers and physicists and so forth. So they were well prepared to take on this venture. And
okay.
Like me, I went on to flight test, and again listening to this other pilot. He said, "Well, I'm going to fixed wing school, and they should call you from Washington to offer you, to go to flight school." And like they did, they called me out of class and told me, say, "Hey, you did well on your test. We'd like to send you to flight school." But I knew Viet Nam was a path I had to take also. So when I told the other pilot, I said, "Hey, they're going to send me to flight school." He said, "Well, you take fixed wing." He said, "I'm going to fixed wing school, and they'll probably try to send you to fly helicopters. And you don't want to fly helicopters in Vietnam." So he said, "You go back and tell them you'll go to flight school if they give you fixed wing school." And that's what I did. And they called me back later and said, "Hey, you're going to fixed wing school at Fort Rucker, Alabama upon graduation."
Wow. That's very, very interesting, Lieutenant Colonel Graham. Let me take one moment, please, to thank all of those that are here with us, Ms. Dorothy Pinkett and Pat, and I see one brother has joined us, Sarah. Excuse me. We appreciate you guys being here. We have one camera open, and feel free to get on the camera and ask Brother Graham any questions you might want to ask, or we also have Mrs. Elaine Eason Steele, who will be addressing us shortly, and Mrs. Peak, who will also be addressing us. If you have specific questions for them, they are with the Rosa and Raymond Clark Institute. Mrs. Steele is the co-founder, and Mrs. Peak is executive director. So you may want to have some questions about that. But we just wanted to acknowledge you for being here, and also feel very, very comfortable to snag a camera and jump right on. So, Brother Graham, as we move a little forward here, and looking at what we have,
okay,
I just want to say that this is very exciting. I have some more questions here for you that we like to ask, but also I want to allow individuals to hop right in if you have a question. Now, where did you attend? Now, you already told us where you went to college and where you did your aviation training there. And so I realize that this may be a sensitive question, but please allow me to ask it. You know, where were there individuals attempting to discourage you from becoming a pilot? I mean, family, friends, people that you didn't know.
Yes, I came from a teaching family. My mom taught for 37 years. My dad taught school, but he was also a farmer and a carpenter. My sister, I guess, taught 37 years. My brother taught 31 or 32 years. So I came from a teaching family, but teaching was encouraged during that time because here I'm thinking about a career that was something that was very, very expensive to reach. And I had teachers who told me, well, you need to think about something else. But I took that to mean that, you know, they were only looking at their experiences. I was looking at a big, big world out there where they were thinking about, you know, just being in Louisiana and, you know, the experiences they had in the area. So I didn't let that deter me because I always said what God has for you is for you. And you shouldn't let anyone keep you from maximizing your potential. I wanted to go for it, and God provided the way. He placed people in my path to make that happen. And sometimes as I look back now, just to realize that even, you know, the individual I first met who took the flight test, he came from an Ivy League school from the East. He came from a very well-to-do family. But here I was, you know, we met together, and here he was coaching me on to the way I could really get into flight school and realize that dream. So God placed him in my path also.
Excellent. Excellent. Listen,
So,
I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
I just didn't let people making statements. I need to look at another career. I need to do something else. You know, stop me from dreaming. And like I mentioned earlier, what God has for you is for you and no one else.
That's powerful. Which actually segue us into our next question. I know that you've already shared with us that you attended segregated schools during your early part of your career, etc. When you were doing your flight training, did you encounter instructors that look like you and I? You know, and I pose that question because of the myths that surround people of color daily. And actually, you have really answered a lot of that, you know, by saying individuals thought that you should have been doing something else, and possibly you shouldn't even consider going into being a pilot, etc. And I know sometimes, even in modern times, when our children may not have instructors that look like them, sometimes that can be a challenge simply because of information that we've fixed, that we've had placed upon us that we can't achieve. So when you were going through your flight trainings, did you have
yes, and I'm sure the sisters will probably tell you about that too. Milton Pitts Crenshaw, which was a Tuskegee Airman, and that was a Mr. Wright, who was also a Tuskegee Airman. After World War II, and they returned back to their home places, they did instruct at Fort Rucker. Now, I had an opportunity to fly with Mr. Wright, but not with Mr. Crenshaw at that time. Of course, really, you know, the movies and everything else about the Tuskegee Airmen had not come out. But I remember them being instructors at Fort.
Okay.
So that was a good feeling because, like I said, I was the only African American in my class. And of course, that was one other individual who was of Jewish descent. But you could only make one mistake and you were out. They would wash you out. And, you know, and I guess the other individual who was of Jewish descent, we would talk all the time about where we were. And that was the same time and era that, you know, Governor Wallace was still, you know, blocking, you know, from going into the universities and so forth. So we were in that environment, but we knew what we had to deal with. And we knew that we had to study hard and try not to to make a mistake.
Okay. You know what? If I may, I'd like to ask Mrs. Peak or Mrs. Steele if they like. We are going to talk about the Rosa Raymond Parks Institute tonight. But I would like right now if either one of them would like to possibly address what is like to be children of such great legendary individuals. As the Tuskegee Airmen. I don't know their dad's information, not that I need to, but I then would like to share how that feels to be a part of history with everything that we face as of quote color unquote. If they don't mind elaborating on being the daughters of Tuskegee Airmen, of a Tuskegee Airman.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know that Ms. Peak has joined us yet.
Oh, okay.
But this is Elaine Eason Steele, and my father was a mechanic. Of course, he wanted to be a pilot, and certainly to go up in a plane, but due to segregation, he was unable to. So he remained a mechanic and kept the planes flying. So that was a good thing also. Later in life, he was an auto mechanic and owned his own shop where people from all over the Detroit area, would come to get their cars and trucks and mechanical things fixed by him because he was excellent at his craft. But unfortunately, he did not get to fly because of segregation.
Well, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. If I can segue back to Brother Graham. Brother Graham, would you mind describing what it was like to take your first solo flight?
Yes. And I see Dr. Leo Picnic has joined us. Dr. Picnic is the General Secretary for the CME Church Ministry, Men's Ministry. And a great man, a great aviation enthusiast. He really connected me with some of his friends who flew aircraft also. And I just thank him for joining us tonight.
Super. May I stop? May I interrupt you for 1 second? I too want to thank Brother Pinkett. Please feel free to take yourself off of mute anytime you get ready. I just put it on mute because I heard some background movement, but please feel free to take yourself off mute anytime you get ready. Just click the microphone up there. You should be able to see a microphone. Just click that microphone and that will take you off of mute. But I heard some background noises earlier. Okay, I'm sorry, Brother Graham, go ahead.
Okay, now you are asking
I was asking, what was it like to take that first solo flight? Yes.
Well, your solo in your A phase, that's the first phase of flying. One day I just seemed like I couldn't not please my instructor. And of course, you sit in tandem in those aircraft. He's the instructor sits behind you. And it seemed like it was nothing I could do right for him that day. And I kept asking him, what was I doing wrong? And he just said, you just keep doing. So I kept trying, and it seemed like he was not pleased, and he was just raising his voice and everything else. And again, like I said, you can only make one mistake and you're out. So finally he told me to land the aircraft. And I said, well, Mr. Cop, I'm trying to do my best. Just tell me what I'm doing wrong. Well, anyways, you just go ahead and land this aircraft. And when we landed at the stage field, he told me to pull my seat up so he could get out. Well, I knew. I said, well, I'm washed out, and he would not tell me what I'm doing wrong. But he stated when he got out of the aircraft, he stated, now, when I get out of this aircraft, the tail of this aircraft is going to come up much quicker because I'm not going to be in the back of it. You go out there and you give me 3 takeoff and landings and come back here. And then I told him, Mr. Cop, I'm not ready for that, because that was the solo phase. And I was the 5th to solo in that class. And I just felt like I wasn't ready, but he said, I wouldn't send you up there to kill yourself. Now you go and give me 3 takeoff and landings and come back. And of course, that was a solo. And they come back and tear your t-shirt and you made it. But like I said, I was the 5th to solo in that class. We had a class of about 36 students. So that was a great feeling. And again, like I said, the rush came again, they're saying, hey, you can do this. God is giving you the desires of your heart.
Okay. Wow. That had to be pretty scary. If someone is telling, I know that from what you're saying, the experience that you already had, and then you were instructed to go up and land, and you were trying to find out what was taking place. What was going through your mind at that time? I mean, feeling that you weren't ready, knowing that there could have been possible death going up in that plane, feeling that you weren't ready. What kind of emotions were you experiencing at that time?
The main thing I was concerned about, I didn't want to wash out because, like I said, I was the only African American in the class. The other individual who was Jewish had been washed out. I didn't want to wash out. So I was concerned about that. What I was doing, I thought I was doing it right. But when he had confidence in me to go and fly the aircraft and come back and land, being number 5 in that class to do that, I just felt like, well, it wasn't really my time. But he told me it was my time, and I went for it. So that's a great feeling.
Wow, we are trying to get Brother Pinkett off of mute, and evidently is not cooperating with us because I certainly want him to hop in and share with us. Let me just share one more time, Brother Pinkett, in your area, there should be a little microphone right up at the top, and if you hit that microphone button, it should unmute you. So, and while Brother Pinkett is finding the microphone to be unmuted, Brother Graham, would you mind sharing with us, what was your first tour of duty in Vietnam like? I mean, I know that's a very vague question. It is a very broad question anytime you're going into the possibility of possibly not returning. But if you don't mind, would you kind of share with us, what your first tour of duty in Vietnam was like?
Yes. My very first mission as a pilot was flying up the Saigon River. As the ships would come into the south from the South China Sea into Saigon, they had to come through a town called Vung Tau. And the first mission they gave me was to pick those ships up at Vung Tau, and as they came up the Saigon River to fly cover for them. I had rockets to fire if any enemy would try to strike them while they were coming up the river. So that was what they considered the easy mission. After a few missions like that, I would fly supporting the 18th Arvin Brigade as far as troop insertions. And then as the B-52s prepped the ground, and they made large craters in which the troops used as landing zones, and to go out there and to make sure that the helicopters that were coming in did not receive any fire, especially landing and taking off. Those were the first missions I had, and you flew all by yourself at that point. But I just felt at that point I'd gotten enough time, and no, my main responsibility was getting there and to prep those areas before the troops got. I never wanted anything to happen because of being late, uh, having to them shoot a helicopter down with troops on board. But those were the first type missions that I flew um, in Vietnam. I had my own region, which is a very large region, and you learn that region like the back of your hand. Every time anything moved within your region, you would know it. So I, I just made sure that I covered all my bases. Um, Later, as things improved and we got more experience, they move you, they transition you into another unit and so forth. There were missions flying the Ho Chi Minh Trail. As you couldn't see, it was triple canopy jungle. So they used Agent Orange, which we all have suffered from, to defoliate the trail so you could see the enemy. But it killed all the vegetation, the trees, and all the we call the elephant grass, all the vegetation that Agent Orange did. But it also did a job on us too. And so many veterans are suffering from the effects of Agent Orange. Wow. It wasn't really tested before they used it in Vietnam, South Vietnam. But the missions were of a point where whatever they assign you to do, because many times, like I said, you were by yourself, you flew alone. You had to make sure that what you did was right and timely.
In essence, what you're sharing with us is that your job was actually pretty parallel to the Red Tails. It was protecting and making sure that that the missions were able to be carried out and that kind of thing.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Yes, that's wow. That's something. Brother Pinkett, feel free to hop right in. I'm sorry that we have some technical glitches, but feel free to hop right in.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the technology. It's me.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, sir. Good to meet both. Good to meet you, Brother Melvin. And
good to meet you, Brother Pinkett.
You got to understand, Brother Dr. Graham is an unusual man. We met a year ago or so, and it seems like we've been joined at the hip for years.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of commitment, as you can see in his demeanor and the type of individual he is. He's a perfectionist by his trade, not only in an aircraft, but in his operation in his daily life. And I like to commend him for that because in meeting him, I have grown quite a bit and have watched him continue to do what we agreed upon, and that's take care of those young people down there at state duty. And every time I look up, you got them involved, and that's a blessing. But one of the questions I'd like to ask Brother Graham is what would you tell young people about the opportunities when it comes to the military today, especially the Air Force? What would you suggest to them if that's something of an interest? Because we're finding a lot of young kids that want to become pilots, but they're not understanding the correlation between their grades and flight school. And I know there are some options available.
Well, I like to tell young folks that, every job in the military has its equivalent in civilian life. You can go into the military and pick up a marketable skill, whether it's finance, whether it's clergy, whether it's flying aircraft, you name it. Every job in the military has a civilian equivalent. So if they go in and learn and pick this they'll train you in a marketable skill. You can take that out and get a civilian job. The military teaches you to manage and budget. It teaches you discipline, timeliness. It teaches you all of those things, which we need, to to know how to be, take your rightful place in society. The military is good at doing this. I encourage people, if they don't really know what they want to do after graduating from high school, that you go in the military and see. We've had generals who were at that time, back before the judge, if they did something wrong, the judge gave them a choice: going to jail or the military, and they chose the military, the lesser of the evils.
Yeah.
And they stayed there. Once they got in, and 3-star generals, from a private all the way up to a 3-star, because they found something they love doing. I tell anyone, to whatever you do, you take that as a passion. And what I mean by passion is finding a job you're going to live for and you'll die for. Whatever we do it with a passion and learn all you can and be the best you can be at it, at whatever you're doing.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I share that. I've got a couple of them on this other piece of technology here, the cell phone. We just finished a class with some of the kids that are majoring in math, and they have a focus, but one of them in particular said that he wanted to be a pilot, and he's been saying that for the past month and a half. So when I got your email today, I said, I'm tuning into this and going to put him on the line. But one of the questions he had,
feel free to if you like, you can put him on speaker and he can ask. Yeah. He can ask himself. We don't mind at all. We don't mind at all, Dr. Pinkett.
Okay, he just texted me back. He says, "Not ready yet. Ask the question." He said, the second question he had was,
yes, sir.
What particular courses? He's what considered to be a sophomore now, and he's on point with English and his core curriculum, and he has a passion for mathematics, and he thinks it's a waste of time going forward to take anything else other than trig or calculus, and I'm saying to him that the literature requirements, some of those basic pieces, they has to get out of the way. He has to take them. So I'm encouraging him to try to take some of the math courses over at the technical school over at Georgia Military College, because while he's not having to pay any tuition for that. So by the time he gets ready to graduate, he'll be a leg up.
Right, absolutely. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I majored in math because that was the easiest course for me. Those who really, and if he has a passion for it, he should go for it. The engineering area, physics, I mean, they all prepare you, but don't just, I just felt like I had a secondary education, a second-class education when I went through, but those teachers taught me the best they knew. And I didn't know it until I started competing with those guys who had gone to Ivy League schools, just how well that I had learned, and it helped me. I see where Mrs. Patricia A. had said airlines admitted they're going to have a shortage of pilots, and that's always been the case. When I was in flight school, they only had 27 African Americans in the whole of aviation. And this was back in the early 60s. Only 27. And they still have a shortage. The pilots are retiring, and there's still a shortage. And, the opportunities are great. Just don't feel like, it's too hard to reach. Because like me, I didn't have the money. I know when I was in flight school, it cost at that time, $250,000 to train a pilot in the military. Now it's over $6 million. But that's wonderful training, and they're going to try to keep you in there so they can get their money's worth out of you. But I wanted to fly commercially, and I stayed in until I felt like I was getting too old to fly commercial before I got out. But there's still shortages in aviation. in civilian aviation. And I'm just glad to see, our African American female pilots flying commercial aircraft. It's just a great thing now is available. And like I said, only 27, when I was in flight school, it was only 27 African Americans in aviation. I have the article to show you when I was in flight school in Fort Rucker, that was the total amount. But see what it's like now. There's still room for us to do that and to join. So please tell anyone who's thinking about it to go for it. Anything worth having is worth working for.
Yeah, brother Clovis Jones in Arizona, yes, who retired. He was a helicopter fighter pilot over in Vietnam.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You had a chance to meet him, I think, last year. Did he stop through while he was okay? Well, he decided to go back and start training pilots at age 74 in Arizona. But he called me over the holidays. He said he didn't want a job. He said he was a retired pilot, one of the, like Brother Graham, one of the few pilots that were in Vietnam that happened to be African American, but came out and exercised his abilities and wound up flying for Mr. Smith over at FedEx. He was his personal corporate pilot until he retired.
Wow.
And he's trying to OBAP, I believe it's called, Brother Graham, OBAP, the Association of Airline Pilots.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're trying to re-engage that particular group now. And Brother Harley, John Harley, who's a public relations director for Tuskegee Airmen here in Atlanta, told me to tell you hello, but he had a church requirement tonight.
Oh, okay. Well, give me my best regards, sir.
I will.
Yes.
Okay, gentlemen, as you can see, Pat has joined us. Pat
hello.
is a great. How you doing, Pat? Did you say hello to us?
Doing well. How about you?
Good evening.
We're doing just great.
Good evening.
Listen, may I ask Lieutenant Colonel Graham, if you mind, right now, that's a perfect segue where you and Brother Pinckney are talking about the opportunities and moving forward and doing things. And as you know, we have Mrs. Elaine Steele, the co-founder of the Rose and Raymond Parks Institute, on the line with us. And I'd like to ask Mrs. Steele if she does some of the work that's happening with the Rosa Parks Institute, and as we all are talking about young people moving forward, and I know what your motto is, but I'm not going to spoil it. We'll ask you to share it if you'll speak a moment as we continue on with Lieutenant Colonel Graham and our guests. Of course, you're a guest as well, Mrs. Steele.
Well, thank you very much. Ms. Peak, have you joined us? Absolutely.
Oh, well, listen, guys, let me back up. I didn't realize earlier that Mrs. Peak hadn't joined us, but Mrs. Peak is the executive director of the Rosa and Raymond Park Institute for Self-Development. And as I've said several times, Mrs. Steele is the co-founder, and they are sisters. And their dad was a Tuskegee Airman, and she's expressed with us about his mechanical skills and keeping you guys flying, brother, so that you would hit the ground. So I'm going to give way to them because I think it's a perfect segue for them to share with us about the Rose and Raymond Park Institute and what they're about.
Ms. Peak, you can proceed. Well, the institute was set up young people, in particular between the ages of 11 and 17, who had average skills, because the way our society is set up, if you're exceptionally, if special things for you, if you have disabilities, there's special things for you, but or special challenges. But if you're just a regular person, there hadn't been that push to see if you could reach your highest potential. And so that's what Mrs. Parks was about. She wanted to make sure that every young person had an opportunity to reach their highest potential. So we do a little stretching with young people, giving them as much historical information as we can about where we live and the rest of the world, as well as developing their character and giving them critical thinking skills that are not always specialized in school anymore. And we make sure that they learn about themselves so that they can understand where they have been and where they're going. That's our theme for Pathways to Freedom, our stellar program for young people.
Fantastic.
Right now, we're getting ready to start a diverse program for young people in the metropolitan Detroit area. And we'll talk about that a little more later.
Okay. Mrs. Peak,
that's wonderful.
As we roll back to Lieutenant Graham, I'm going to come back to you if you don't mind, and ask you just share with us a little bit about. I know that you've shared your story, with many of us about how you actually came to be a right-hand person of Mrs. Park. But if you don't mind, after we move back with Brother Graham, if you just kind of parlay that to us a little bit, we'd be appreciative. But Brother Graham, share with us, if you will, your initial thoughts of actually going to war. To prepare for any situation, but it's another thing when you actually have to report. Do you mind sharing with us your initial feelings about it?
I don't mind. I was commissioner second lieutenant at Southern University, and the oath we all take, that we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. And you don't take that lightly. And of course, that will put you in harm's way of being a military. And I'm so proud of our military then, now, and in the future, because, we can sleep at night knowing that, you have people out there putting their lives on the line to protect us.
Amen.
I had one fight in high school and here all of a sudden found myself on my way to Viet Nam. But I knew I had a duty to my country, and I thank God for the opportunity to have served my country. We didn't run away. And of course, during that time, they did have a draft, but I had, signed up to be a commissioned officer to go and do my duty. And, duty, honor, and country is just something that's ingrained in us, so going to war was part of that. And no one likes, a war, and especially, I don't think any soldier just really love going to war. But we know we have a duty to protect this country and our loved ones. And if we look back in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, we have played back to the American Revolution. We have paid our dues, and we stood up proudly to do that. And I just felt the same way, having to go to serve the Vietnam. Even after Vietnam, I flew 2 tours over in Europe. And that way and that was during the Cold War. We were flying against the Russians and the East Germans. They weren't our allies during that time. But, when you're out there, you have a mission to perform, you do that to the best of your ability. And of course, when you take that oath, that's a solemn oath. And, I just feel like God, protected me and to do the things that he allowed me to do.
Well, I have a large cadre of individuals in my family that are military, and I never served in the military. With all due respect to you, I never had any desire to serve in the military, but I highly respect those individuals that do. Everybody have an opinion about the war and that kind of thing. And I wanted you to have the opportunity to express to us from a person that's been there and done that. So, I do appreciate you sharing that with us. And again, I say to our audience, a lot of people, Dr. Graham, you can't see because they are, on other mediums, and you can't see them like you can on the Get Vocal. Believe me. If you guys will, all of us are familiar with Mrs. Parks and with her fight and plight. And it's one thing to read about someone. There's another thing to be able to hear from individuals and those individuals that were involved. And if I can segue back to Mrs. Elaine Easton Steele, who is the co-founder of the Rose and Raymond Park Institute, just if you will, Mrs. Steele, just share with us a little bit, if you would, about your experience with Mrs. Parks, because most people never get to hear from the princess's mouth. So if you'll share with us for a moment, please. I can barely hear you.
I'm sorry, I had the phone upside down. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. I hear you clearly.
Okay.
Not a problem.
I said Mrs. Parks was born in Tuskegee and lived there until she moved to Detroit in 1955. And of course, she experienced all of the different atrocities that people in the South did at that time in regards to segregation, and had to govern herself accordingly with the signs that said where colored people, what facilities they used and where they had to sit, that all of that was a part of it, and she adhered to it. After the boycott, when she refused to give up her seat on the Montgomery bus to a white man, things began to change. They began to change slowly, and of course, under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King. And but shortly after that, Mrs. Parks moved to Detroit, Michigan, because she was fired from her job in Montgomery, and it was just not economically feasible for them to remain there. So she moved to Detroit, and at first Detroit wasn't, the Mecca that she would have hoped. But soon she started working for Congressman John Conyers, and she stayed with him for many years. Her husband became a barber. He got his barber's license while he was here in Detroit, which he was unable to do in Alabama because of segregation. Mm-hmm. And it made it very difficult for people of color to get the appropriate license that were required for a certain profession. And life was tough in Detroit also, but it was not as tough as it was in Montgomery. Right. She worked for Congressman Conyers. I think that many of you may have known that. And Congressman Conyers was very pleased, to have her as a part of his staff, and especially since she was an excellent worker.
Wow.
And does anyone have any questions, or does Ms. P, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Well, I guess it was a bunch of gaps in that
family because her mother was a circuit teacher. She had to go from school to school. And then she moved to Montgomery later on as she, because in Alabama, black girls could go to school up through the 5th grade, boys 3rd grade. And so she went to a private school from the 6th grade and through the 10th. I think it was the 10th or the 11th. Yes, it was the 10th grade. Yes, through the 10th grade.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. Just before, it's getting time for us to wrap up, just before we get back to Lieutenant Colonel Graham, Mrs. Steele, I would ask if you could just, I know the story, but if you can give us a brief excerpt of how you actually came to meet Mrs. Parks and how you became her right-hand person.
Well, as a student in high school, I got an after-school job at a sewing factory, and one of the workers there was Mrs. Rosa Parks. Yeah, I was too excited to meet her, was putting it mildly. I had seen her on television and certainly knew the story of the Montgomery bus boycott. So I was just elated to meet her. And the sewing machine that I was assigned to was right next to hers, and she helped me in learning how to use a power sewing machine, because although in high school I did use a domestic sewing machine, which was one that for the younger people that you used a pedal that you would work back and forth with your feet. With a power machine, you just stepped on a presser foot and it would just take off. Yeah. So when it took off, my stitches went in many different ways. Was very kind in helping me remove the stitches and to learn the correct way of using a power machine. But after about a week, it was a mutual decision between the employer and the employee that perhaps I was not the seamstress that they needed.
Okay.
And that there was another type of employment that would be available for me. And so I was dismissed. Okay. And I didn't meet Mrs. Parks again until after I had graduated from high school. And her mother and my mother, not my mother, but one of the mothers of the church, were in the same nursing home. And when she visited her mother, and my mother, my sister, and I visited the mother of the church, we would all meet at the nursing home. And we developed a close bond. And after I graduated from high school, Mrs. Parks worked for Congressman John Conyers. I worked for the United States Court, and we worked in the same building, and we started riding home together after work, and the rest is history.
Okay. Wow. You know,
Wow.
I wanted to ask you to share that with us, because I wanted to parallel the struggles of men and women of color when we have individuals like you and Mrs. Peak, when we have Lieutenant Colonel Graham, when we have Dr. Pinkett. It is very critical that we all understand, you know, how brilliant we are. And I kept hearing my friend, Lieutenant Colonel, he kept saying, well, I thought I had a second-rate education. I thought I had a second-rate education. And it's very critical that we all understand just what he's saying, is that we have been inundated with being brainwashed so much by those that do not look like us, until sometimes we internalize that we are, quote, in some way inferior, not even realizing that we. So I'm going. I'm a poet. I'm gonna use a pun here. I knew that as you were weaving your story, we could weave these stories together, because with your situation and the way that you actually encountered Mrs. Parks and brother Lieutenant Graham, who was actually encouraged to go into flying by this Jewish gentleman, and Dr. Pinkett, who's also joined with us, was actually and physically on the phone talking to some young men who had questions about becoming a pilot and all the things they want to do. It just takes us all back to the adage of the African proverb that it takes a village. And so we all are part of the village that it takes to move forward. So I would, if we're all in agreement, that we can go back to Dr. Graham, Lieutenant Graham at this time, because Lieutenant Graham, I really would like, and you physically live there in Ruston, where I did my college work for the most part. We encountered a lot of situations that were not necessarily comfortable for people of color. And I would just like to know, when you were in the military, we've seen red tails, and we've heard analogies of other gentlemen having been in the military and the situations that they've had to encounter, or that they had to encounter with their other military counterparts. And allow me just to use the word, our less melanated military counterparts. Would you mind sharing with us as we close? Did you encounter a lot of consternation from those that were less melanated that served in the military with you?
In flight school and my other jobs, and in fact, that when I was in Europe, I was the only African American pilot, as well as the commander. I was the executive officer and the commander of a unit, and I was the only African American. But if you do your job, and if you do it right, you stick by the rules and you're fair, people will accept you for who you are and what you stand for. And I just like in closing just to say, I thank God we are all standing on the shoulders of giants who really, paved the way for us. And we need to do the same thing. I never shall forget, my grandfather used to always say, if we are to progress as a race, each generation must do better than the previous generation. And, he only had an opportunity to go to about the third grade, but he educated his children. And he said that my children had to do better than us, and your children will have to do better than you. So that's the only way we can progress, is to keep each generation moving, excelling, and doing much better than the opportunities that we had. Like I said, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we need to keep that going. We need to keep passing that baton on. And Dr. Pickett, those young folks that you encounter, we just need to just keep encouraging them. Give them a pat on the back. Everyone just loves a pat on the back. And so, and we're no different. So we just need to keep encouraging our young folks to keep going forward, because I had it. And if you do your job, like you mentioned, as far as people, they never said it to me. Those that were in my unit, those I served with, they may have thought it, but they never said it, because they knew I was always fair-minded. I always believe in doing the right thing. So they accepted me as that.
Super. Dr. Pinkett.
Yes, sir.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we give Brother Graham the last word?
Just a little kudo. I had the privilege of witnessing the degree of respect that Dr. Graham has earned in his tenure in the military when he took me by the base. And when a lieutenant colonel approaches, it don't matter what color you are, you got to give it up, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yes, sir.
the level of respect that he possesses with the humility that he has is highly unusual and very profound, because he's always the same, regardless of his stature in life. And I respect that highly. That's the reason I consider him a brother, a friend, and will always again be joined at the hip. But I commend you, sir, for this month of celebration. But you know how we do. We do it 365.
Yes,
we don't
sir.
let up.
Right. Right.
Thank you,
Right.
sir. Those wonderful comments.
Yeah.
Right.
Mrs. Peak, Mrs. Steele, you have any closing comments you'd like to share before we give our friend and our brother the last comment?
Well, it was just a plum pleasing pleasure to be here again with you, and I certainly enjoyed listening to the gentlemen. They sound a little younger than my father, because he was in World War II, and they sound like they were post World War II. Am I correct?
You are correct.
So
Yes.
he kind of helped in laying the groundwork, but there was still a lot of work to do when they reached the service. And, you know, I think there's still a lot of work to do today.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Peak?
I agree. And I wanted to say about Mr. Raymond Parks that he was a barber at Marshall Field in Tuskegee. And but he couldn't, but as Ms. Steele said, he couldn't get a license in Alabama because of the race. And he had a third grade education, but when he came to Detroit, he went to night school and he tested immediately at 8th grade. So he did get his barber's license here in Detroit. But I just wanted you to know when you were saying about how a lot of times our abilities are underestimated.
Yes.
I think we need to work on that with our young people today, to let them know that they can achieve. They just have to read. They can achieve.
Thank you for that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, listen, I have certainly been enriched, and I sincerely mean that. I have certainly been enriched, and just as Brother Pinkett, when I met, I'd observed Lieutenant Colonel at some of the church meetings before, and like most people, I passed by, I nod my head, but I didn't really know him. He didn't know me. But as he and I started talking, I can say, man, this is a fantastic brother. He is. We need to know. I mean, he has so much history and so much knowledge, and he's such an impressive person. And I'm telling you, I am saying this to the millions of people that's listening. They need to get this brother in to speak yesterday. And Brother Pinkett has already alluded to it. We do it 366. Actually, Brother Pinkett, we do it 366. We're just being kind to talk about the label of having Black history. Yeah. So just let me say, and I've said to other people, Brother Pinkett and Lieutenant Colonel, I have the utmost respect for Mrs. Peak and Mrs. Elaine Easton Steele, man. I mean, they are phenomenal women. They just do fantastic work, and they're dedicated, and they work very hard. And they, I do want to ask them about how can, if someone wishes, and I hope they do, to donate to the Rose and Raymond Parks Institute, how would they go about that?
Well, you can go to our website, www.rosaparks.org. We also have a GoFundMe page Park Institute, and you can always mail in a donation to 535 Griswold Street, Michigan 48226, or 9336 Wildemere Street, Wildemere, Detroit, Michigan 48206. That's the house where Mrs. Parks lives for quite a while.
Wow.
And we turned it into a youthful place. I'll say that. Okay, guys. We appreciate that. It's time to go. We went a little bit over, but that's okay. I fortunately get to control this. So, Dr. Graham, and I'm going to call you Dr. Graham respectfully. Will you tell us if anyone wants to contact you? I'm sure there will be people wanting to. Will you tell us how they can do that?
Okay. My email address is bgraham2211@yahoo.com. My cell number is area code 318-265-2211, or my home number is 318-255-7899. My home address is 2211 Cooktown, that's one word, Cooktown Road in Ruston, Louisiana, Ruston, Louisiana. Zip code is 71270.
Okay, fantastic. Well, listen, it's been great. Everybody's been here. As I said earlier, coming into the show, Dr. Pinkett, I do want to ask you as well. I mean, I can tell, brother, that you have a lot to share with us. And Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Graham was telling me earlier about one of you guys' friends that's an artist, and we'll be talking about him. But I certainly want to have the opportunity to share with you as well. Right. Dr. Pinkett, if you can share with us how we may be able to contact you, sir.
Okay. My email address is lpinkettace@yahoo.com. Cell phone 404-304-7860. My office address is the Department of Ministry to Men, in care of Dr. Leo Pinkett, 2850 Shoreland, Shoreland Drive, Southwest, and that's Atlanta, Georgia, 30331.
Okay, Shoreland Drive. Tell me the number again, please, sir.
2850.
2850. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
Atlanta.
I have a little motto too. We might doze.
Talk to us.
We might doze, but we never close.
Okay. I like that. I like that. That's good. Okay, guys, and you can always contact me. The easiest way, really the best way, is go to my website, www.dyingonmyfeet.com, www.dyingonmyfeet.com. All of my social media outlets are there, and you know a little bit about me. So go to my website and check it out. I'm an author. I'm a poet. I'm also a weekly columnist for the Good Men Project. I write weekly articles. I write for 3 magazines: Black Family Magazine, Black Life, and I just started writing for this one. I think it's Black Life and Conscious. I think it's. But anyway, make a long story short, I'm a retired high school principal. We do male empowerment sessions, by the way. Dr. Pinkett, I've had Dick Gregory in to do one conference for me. I've had the Jim Brown in to do one conference for me, and we just work around like that. And so anyway, if you get an opportunity, go and check out my website. And there are a lot of things that I'm an ordained minister. However, I'm not a pastor by choice. And that's something that God and I have to work out. But I don't think He told me to pastor. So but I am a minister. So listen, guys, it's been a great night. I certainly enjoy everyone for your diligence and your perseverance and your willingness to work with me. And I plan for all of us to get together again. And once we stop the broadcast, the platform always stays open, by the way. And once the broadcast stops, then individuals can still converse and talk until you just pass out or until you get ready to hang up. So at this time, we thank everyone for being on here, and we are stopping the broadcast to end this segment of the Nobody Asked Me Guy. We bid you adieu.
Adieu.
All right. Good evening.
Thank you.